So hello, everybody. I'm Steve Hall, your host for this episode, and welcome to episode 22 of the Imagine Your Future podcast. Our aim with this podcast is to inform, educate, and engage our listeners on technology and digitally related topics. We have a great lineup of senior execs and thought leaders from various industries scheduled for the year. So please subscribe and stay tuned on LinkedIn and other social channels as we continue to expand the podcast. I tell you what, this one is going to be fun. I'm joined by Stanton Jones, our very own index insider, and Bret Breeding, our in-house quant and guru for the trends that are shaping the outsourcing and technology industries. Stanton and Bret have both been with ISG for over 15 years, so combined we have over 50 years of industry expertise to entertain you for the next 30 minutes. So Stanton, give us a little bit about yourself and introduce yourself to our audience.
Sure. Thanks, Steve. Actually, last month was my 20th year at ISG, if you can believe that. So I was ISG's CIO for a number of years. Steve, as you know, I moved into our consulting business. I reported to you for a number of years and helped us to build out our cloud advisory services. And now I'm in our research business, which I absolutely love, working closely with you and Bret and the rest of the team to track the health of the IT services market and help our enterprise clients and providers and private equity understand the key changes happening in our market.
Excellent. And Bret, I think you're coming up on 20 years as well. Give us a little bit about your history with ISG.
Well, that's true. I've actually got about 30 years experience in this, a little over 30 years experience in this sector. I got my start at EDS back in the day as an engineer. I wasn't very good at it, so I moved into the sales and marketing side eventually. And eventually I kind of settled into roles of sales support, especially in the competitive intelligence areas. And so over the years, I've worked at 4 different firms, each doing a variety of competitor and market intelligence type of roles, working at EDS, of course, working at Shell, running the competitive intelligence function at Compaq, and then finally coming here about 20 years ago. And so back in the day, I got my start, working competitive intelligence issues and engagement related issues here for the firm. From the very early on, I moved into areas like the index, and over the years, I've just really enjoyed working here. But one of the great things I think that if you could say what's one of the great things you like about your job is the chance to develop new and exciting things that maybe the industry has not ever seen before. As I kind of think through some of the projects we're working on lately, with forecasting and mergers and acquisitions, it really kind of makes the job very rewarding.
Very cool. So if I got this right then and my math is right, one, I'm the newbie on this call, which I didn't think I would be with 15 years now with ISG. But I think that gives us 55 years of experience. So with that level of experience with you guys on this, I suspect we can provide some great insights on where the market is going. So let's get started. I think many of our podcast listeners are familiar with the ISG Index, but for those of you that aren't, let me give you a brief overview. So ISG is in a unique position to consult or advise with over 700 clients per year, and we really help them develop their overall technology strategy and operating model, which typically still includes outsourcing and adoption of as-a-service technologies, such as cloud computing or software as a service. Because ISG negotiates and solutions over 50% of the advice deals in the market, those tend to be the very large deals, and we just have a treasure trove of data and data insights that really provides a cool perspective on the market. We're also part of a data exchange program that provides deal information from scores of service providers and an internal research arm that scours the depths of the internet to provide insights on publicly released deals that may not have been advised. We combine all this data for the last 75 quarters, or almost 19 years, to really inform Wall Street analysts, service provider execs, and clients on the state of the market. So Bret, I think the first conversation is really for you. You've been part of this index since the very first call in the summer of 2002. Give us a history of how it started, how it's evolved over the years, and how you've really seen the index shape the market.
Well, that's a very good question, Steve, and one of them that I get asked all the time by a lot of people that I'm connected with out there. And one of the answers I'd give is that we used to have global conferences back in that day, and one of the advisors spoke with one of our partners at the time and said, it'd be really neat that if we took a lot of the deal data, deal characteristics of things that we're advising on, and could talk about it with the market. Assuming, of course, that we advise on a large share of the market, which we do. And let's talk about those characteristics of the deals that we're working on and share that with the market on, let's say, a quarterly basis. So that really was the genesis of this. And when I went through my interviews with several of the partners and it kind of showed them some of the things that we did at Compaq on a quarterly basis, we were able to kind of marry those two concepts together, and that became V1 of the index. Of course, with that goes is that after the very first index call happened, we talked to our audience of a lot of the financial analyst community, and the thing they came back with is, well, that's great that you're sharing a lot of information about deals you advise on. Can you talk to us about the deals you're not advising on as well? Kind of give us a synthesis of those two groups and segments. And so that's how we actually created our version 1 of our contracts database. I remember creating that in a hotel room in San Diego, California, when my wife and I were on vacation. I stayed up at 11 o'clock, started working on it, and next morning she woke up and says, "What are you doing still up?" I said, "Well, I think I created something pretty neat." And that was our first contracts database, and that became a lead feature of index number 2's call. So over the years, the industry has evolved where you've seen, deal sizes get smaller. You've seen deal durations get smaller. And so, we're on our original index call, we used to look at deals with a total contract value over 200 million. And then it shortened down to 25 million over the years. And then, of course, durations, shrunk as well. And we took eventually we eliminated the deal duration, moved to an ACV perspective. And then, of course, you think back about 4 or 5 years ago when we started adding in the as a service perspective, as we started looking at how our deals that we advise changed just from the traditional services to now we look at deals where we advise where, infrastructure as a service is in scope or SaaS deals are in scope. We had to make that change on the index as well. And so that's been a very exciting thing that's happened over the years as well. So it's hard to believe we've kind of gotten down to 75 deals or 75 index calls at this point.
Yeah, that's amazing, Bret. I hadn't heard this story before of you creating the contract knowledge database in a hotel. That's funny. I've heard so many of your great stories. I'm always just so amazed and sitting here with a big smile as I hear about the evolution of the index. So let me give the audience just a bit of an overview. As many as you know, we just completed our index calls and we had some really cool insights this time. One, the global demand for technology services has really never been higher. The first quarter, we produced a record $17.1 billion of annual contract value, so that was up 11%. The traditional managed services business, or what we refer to as generally the IT outsourcing and business process outsourcing business, grew 7% in the first quarter. Cloud-based as a service segment, so this is everything in the as a service space, so SaaS, PaaS, the hyperscalers, infrastructure services, et cetera, that rose 15%. So just incredible growth in that business. And the infrastructure as a service had bookings that topped $7 billion this quarter. And one of the things that we talk about, as Bret mentioned, was ACV, which is annual contract value of these larger deals. That's essentially our indication of bookings, if you will. So what is the deal flow that's going in? So if it's a 3-year deal, and let's say it's 100 million, that ACV would be 30 million over that time frame. So it's a good indication of what the bookings are for the business. But you know what? This isn't about numbers. What we really want to talk about is highlight some of the key impacts and trends and just having observations and a really good discussion about what we're seeing in the broader market. So let me start right off. I think one of the things that we've really seen lately, and Bret, you've been really responsible for driving a lot of this, is so much M&A activity, especially around cloud and product engineering. So DXC recently acquired Luxoft, Capgemini recently acquired Altran, and just this week we saw a big announcement that Hitachi acquired GlobalLogic. So there just seems to be an awful lot of M&A activity in the space. Can you spend some time and give us some indication, Bret, on what's driving that level of M&A and how you see the future of that going?
Yeah, this month has been a really a lot of activity in M&A. When you think about both on the product engineering side, and then I'll kind of go a little bit into what we've been seeing in cloud recently as I kind of update a lot of my files for the quarter here. So in the product engineering space, the news of the month has been, of course, Hitachi's acquisition of Global Logic for nearly $10 billion. That was so dang big that it kind of overshadowed a lot of the other M&A activity in the space, like, Cognizant's acquisition of ESG Mobility or Endava's purchase of Lavelle, just to kind of name a few. The size of the acquisition was well beyond anything we've seen in this space, and is much larger, than Capgemini's $4 billion acquisition of Altron or DXC's, $2 billion acquisition of Luxoft, as you mentioned. When you think about Hitachi, Hitachi has, traditionally been this large IT services provider, primarily in Japan, a full service implementation provider with 8% market share. Their strengths have been to kind of like, bridge the gap between information technology or computers and operations technology, which is, essentially the industrial machinery. And, the business opportunity here is that a lot of value in terms of data is being left on the table as these two types of systems are not being connected together very well. And, this acquisition and its success will kind of ultimately be judged on how well data can be extracted and how new services can be delivered to improve the performance of the manufacturing systems. So I'm going to touch a little bit on cloud real quick. In cloud this month, you don't have to go any further than the large deal signed between Microsoft and Nuance. This acquisition, very big, is valued around 16 billion. 20 billion if you factor in some debt. And is Microsoft's largest since the 24 billion they spent on LinkedIn back in 2016. And so it is a very expensive deal that equates to about 14 times the next 12 months revenue for Nuance. So as Microsoft's corporate development team is real large, and they have also been in talks to acquire Discord for about 10 billion. So they can do multiple large deals at once, and there's a lot of money floating around, and high valuations on the software side are not really seeming to hurt that type of activity. As I think about the Nuance acquisition, it's really interesting that they're very good in speech recognition and patterns, and that is really good for Microsoft, which is really trying to get a foothold in AI and the healthcare space, specifically medical transcription, where Nuance has a lot of clients. Chief among them is Epic, which has a lot of large data sets on patients. So Nuance is really good at turning voice into gathering unstructured data and making very important business processes more efficient. So Microsoft is looking to tie all of that into their Azure platform. So this is kind of one of many steps that Microsoft's going to need to take to, solidify their position in the healthcare space. But there is tremendous upside to process automation, and there's a lot of inefficiency and waste that happens in healthcare space. And, Steve, as I was thinking about my competition hat here, that I always look at everything with an angle on, Amazon is making a real big push into this industry as well with their own platform and, their PillPack acquisition and other initiatives they have going on with delivery of drugs to the home. And, both Amazon and Microsoft are really taking different angles on this. But there is a collision, of course, that's going to happen at some point, just as there have been in other sectors. So there are only so many cloud providers that can compete in the healthcare space because the strict requirements, put on them by the government. But in short, you're going to see all three of the mega clouds pursue this space in a big way.
Well, I think you're right, Bret. I think healthcare is going to be incredibly disrupted as we go forward, and there's going to be lots and lots of changes in there. The Nuance acquisition by Microsoft is interesting to me because of the big multiple, especially around natural language processing. And I think, we're going to continue to just see an explosion of NLP and ML solutions. Microsoft already has, a strong solution there. But with Cortana and some others, they clearly haven't had the same scale that a Siri or an Alexa or even Google have had. So this could be another foray into that. But Stan, let me go back to the product engineering side, because that just feels like a $3 trillion market that's really starting to be disrupted with all things digital. If we go back to the software eating the world analogy that we've always often talked about, it seems like we're going to continue to see just some massive disruption there. From an operational standpoint, what's your take on the product engineering acquisitions?
Yeah, Steve. So Bret mentioned the rapid merging of operational technology and information technology. And we have to remember here, this is not just about industrial equipment, right? It's also about consumer devices. I mean, think about your TV, your monitor. All those kind of consumer devices and equipment are also becoming connected as well. But the kind of underlying theme here is that companies that have traditionally manufactured physical products need to become software companies. And it's not just about building software, it's about also creating interface that is awesome to use. I mean, think about getting into your car today. Do you use the car manufacturer interface or do you use CarPlay? I don't know about you guys, but I always use CarPlay because it's familiar and it's beautiful and I know how it works. The car manufacturers don't know how to make a great interface. Apple does. Apple, is a hardware and software company. But it's not just also about creating those interfaces and the software that lives behind it. It's also about managing that software and upgrading that software and securing the software. We talked a lot on the Insider lately about the breaches that are happening around industrial equipment getting connected to the internet. So there's a whole life cycle that manufacturing companies don't do and they've never done before. And really the fastest way for them to get those rewards that they're going to reap from data, as Bret said, and from recurring revenues is to acquire software companies. And that's why we're seeing such traction around, as Bret mentioned, the Altran acquisition by Capgemini, which, by the way, just recently renamed to Capgemini Engineering, Cognizant's acquisition of ESG, DXC's acquisition of Luxoft last year. So I think we're going to continue to see those kinds of acquisitions happen where manufacturing companies, whether it's consumer durable goods or heavy industrial equipment, are going to continue to acquire and organically build as they can, but primarily acquire that software engineering capability.
Yeah, agreed. Do you dare speculate on who's next?
I don't, but I think we're going to continue to see a lot of acquisition activity happen in this space. Don't know who's next, but I think it's going to continue to ramp up.
Yeah, I would agree with that. On the back of Microsoft, as Bret, as you mentioned, they're making a lot of big moves. One of the moves they made really over the last, I would call it 6 months, but really accelerated that over the last month, is the launch of Power Automate. And it looks to me like we're going to see massive disruption in the RPA business, the robotic process automation business as well. UiPath is going public with just an obscene multiple right now on their revenue. Stanton, can you give us a sense of what's happening with RPA and why big tech is going all in on it?
Sure. I think there's a lot of interesting things happening this quarter with big tech. As we talked about on the index and then the Insider, Microsoft acquired an RPA company called Softomotive. That was actually last year. But what's interesting is this quarter, they made their Power Automate platform free. And kind of our view is that likely they're going to start to deploy that RPA capability through the Power Automate platform. And if you think about the reach that Microsoft has into the enterprise through its productivity suite, I mean, think about how disruptive that's going to be. If they deploy a enterprise class RPA solution through their productivity suite, which most companies in the world are running, that's going to be really disruptive. Google also made some really interesting moves this quarter. They partnered up with Automation Anywhere. So there's kind of two things happening there. They're going to offer up a 360 platform on GCP, but then there's also sort of a behind the scenes relationship where Google has committed to Automation Anywhere to building and integrating Automation Anywhere into its product. So they're not only going to use it, but they're also going to offer it up on their cloud. But what's really interesting here is that it's not just big tech. I mean, really, ultimately, I think big tech is taking notice because of a lot of things that have been happening before this. So you mentioned UiPath. They acquired a company called Cloud Elements this quarter. So Cloud Elements is interesting because it's actually an API management platform. So that will enable, in theory, UiPath to kind of move down the stack to enable its bots to talk to APIs. So think about all the enterprise applications that are exposing APIs, having a bot being able to kind of go down the stack to talk to an API and then move back up the stack and hand it off to another bot. ServiceNow actually kind of took a different direction. They made an acquisition this quarter in IntelliBot, which actually kind of takes them up the stack. So rather than moving, things through their workflow platform, moving towards more of a screen-based automation. Those kind of acquisition activities have been happening for a while. I think it's just now that big tech is starting to take notice. And I think there's going to continue to be a lot of this kind of activity as ultimately all of these guys want to be sort of the enterprise stack for moving data around the enterprise. And I think we're going to continue to see a lot of activity in this space.
No, that is cool. I think you're absolutely right. So, Bret, I'm going to ask you to put your quant hat on for a second. UiPath is working hard to go, to IPO, to go public. They right now have sort of a 25 to 26 billion valuation if everything goes right. What's your take on what do you think the bigger players in that market are going to do to that IPO price? With Microsoft in there, as Stanton just said, as ServiceNow in there, as Stanton just laid out. Any perspective from you?
Well, it is a very interesting valuation that's been laid out there, 25 billion. At one point, if you remember, UiPath was thought to be kind of a target of Microsoft at some point in the past couple of years, but the valuation may have been a bit too hefty. So I think the valuations are going to be a key consideration for the big guys really getting in play. If something gets too high of a valuation, at what point do you say, okay, it becomes unacquirable? If that's for lack of a better word here. But, for me, when I think about this space here, I think the RPA, since we've really started tracking this market, has really gone through a fast adoption cycle where you see the leveraging of, unattended robots by many companies. And the first targets were really the kind of low-hanging fruits that could be addressed with the unattended bots. But I think that, for the most successful providers or the technology providers that are going to address this market and the ones that are going to run up their valuations the highest, they're going to have to kind of further integrate into the enterprise at a more strategic level. And to do that, you're going to have to kind of automate beyond, the micro tasks. If you really want to get the full benefit, we're going to need to see both, the client and the provider community think, about this thing strategically. And they need to augment RPA with the manpower of like back offices. And that's the approach of attended RPA. I mean, you put the robots with the human beings and combine or synthesizing the two efforts together. And of course, at the same time, the other dynamic that's going on in this space is that we're still seeing the infusion of lots of AI and ML in order to, enable a more sophisticated layer of automation. So, that's the other dynamic in play. But one is the most successful providers are going to, move up higher in the enterprise. They're going to introduce AI and ML into their products on a lot more strategic level. They're going to work with the attended RPA, but will that be a double-edged sword and they run their valuations up so high that no biggie can go out and acquire them? I don't know.
Yeah, good point. Bret, that was a brilliant discussion. Our dog also enjoyed that discussion so much that we may have heard a little barking in the background. So the next section, guys, that I'd like to discuss is really around cybersecurity. As we all know, cybersecurity has been really big in the news. Stanton, I think I saw a report from you earlier this morning in your Index Insider that the IT spend on cybersecurity on a per user basis, I think was up 17%, if I'm not mistaken on the quote. But there's also been some huge breaches this year. Give me a sense, Stanton, on what you think is going on with the broader market there, but really the impact of the breaches this quarter and what are the risks?
Yeah, Steve, it's really been an unprecedented quarter in cybersecurity. So as we've talked about a lot, if you kind of combine the SolarWinds hack and the Exchange hack, we're probably upwards of 50,000 affected organizations across those two hacks. And it's not just enterprises, obviously, it's public sector organizations, federal governments. We saw recently the fact that the European Banking Authority and Norway's parliament were also impacted by the Exchange hack. So, I mean, this is beyond just a enterprise concern. This is now at a national security level. The scope and scale of these attacks are really unprecedented. As you talked about, Steve, we're actually are seeing in response some really significant increases in interest and in spending around cybersecurity at the enterprise level. It's actually 40% is what we published today, Steve. So if you look last year from 2019 to 2020, we saw in our internal databases as we work with clients and help them benchmark their technology and security spending, a 40% increase in spending per user from 2019 to 2020. So this was before the SolarWinds and Exchange hacks. So as we talked about on one of the last indexes, when we kind of went out and polled our advisors who are working with some of the biggest and best companies on the planet, over 70% of them felt like their clients were going to increase their cybersecurity spending again before the SolarWinds and Exchange hacks. So I think no question that spending is going to increase. I think the question is sort of what will that spending be on? I think we're seeing a lot of demand, of course, for better software and better hardware. I think there's going to be a really big demand for security services, which actually is about 60% of that overall cybersecurity market. But those services increasingly focused on more strategic services, working even like at a board level to help companies understand that, they will be hacked and they are already hacked likely. But sort of what's that risk tolerance for, identifying the attack and addressing it and putting in remediation plans to be able to address it? What's the risk tolerance level? And that's like a complete change to the way companies work today. And I think we're going to start to see big change there. We're going to start to see big architectural changes around sort of this zero trust model, which is going to require a rethinking of the network and why we see so much demand around the software defined networking side. And then finally, again, kind of taking this up a level, I think we're going to see some really significant movement like at the federal and international level around creating new norms as countries deal with each other and deal with these cyber threats. In fact, just this week, the Biden administration is set to announce sanctions on Russia in response to these hacking events. So this is really, really big, and I think it's only going to get bigger.
I think you're absolutely right, Stanton. It's very concerning, but we're capitalists, so with threats come opportunities, right? And Bret, I think that's where you come in. You probably got one of the best portfolios of anybody that I know, and I know you follow the security sector really closely. What are the opportunities for the big players? Who's really moving the market? And if you think about our industry with the service provider space, who's going to, what are they sort of shaping up their offerings, and how's that changing?
Well, I kind of was playing a little bit off of Stanton's response in that on sizing. And just recently, Todd McKinnon, the CEO of Okta, was on television talking about the fact that their total addressable market went from 50 to 80 million on their last earnings call. And I just found that that's quite a jump when you think about that. And that's just one player in the space on the software side. And so when you think about all the different players from services to, the network to the software guys, it's a massive opportunity. So for me, I just see this whole cybersecurity space as it's a very dynamic market. It's here to stay. It's ripe for massive investment. I'm in there. My targets originally were a lot of the unicorns that were unicorns in 18, 19 that went public. But I do think the after effects of the SolarWinds and Microsoft quote situations, that customers are really trying to kind of broadly assess where they sit, what they need, what's caused their companies to miss threats in the past. So we're seeing a lot of enterprises perform those kind of assessments. When I talk to a lot of the engagement leads in our firm, email always seems to be a little bit of a focus, or better word, a culprit in a lot of cases. But basically, it feels like customers are really trying to kind of consume whatever security and next generation architecture they can right now to kind of avoid these sorts of situations. So when you combine all of this with this current work from home scenario where we've shifted the legacy security perimeter from a traditional corporate network firewall to this, this new virtual workplace, data is everywhere. And I just think there's going to be more remote work. And that means, there are much more different challenges to security ongoing. And I think a lot of the SaaS firms, especially these newer guys who have IPO'd recently, they're pioneering that zero trust efforts, that Stanton mentioned there, to ensure that no matter where you are on the network, that you will be secure. And of course, the service providers sit at a very interesting angle that they can layer that services on top of all those different solutions. So when I kind of think about where we currently sit in terms of cybersecurity as industry, I think of two different things. One, I think that we're very early on in a fast-growing nascent market, and we're going to see a lot more automated, AI-based detection and response solutions. That's one thing. The second thing I think of is these attacks, whether in the past or unfortunately in the future, they serve as a real rough or stark reminder that the threat actors, they're innovative and they're persistent and are always on the lookout for new ways to break into enterprises and do damage.
No, you're exactly right, Bret. Good summary on that. I know we always throw out lots of numbers on these things. So first of all, Stanton, thanks for the clarification. It's amazing that security spend has gone up 40% over the last year. That is really amazing, and I think it holds with. And Bret, just to clarify, when you said that the addressable market for Okta was that 50 to 80 billion, you said
50 to 80 million.
Million. Yes. Okay, that seems a little smaller. I thought the multi-factor would be a little bit bigger.
Yeah, it probably is. I probably have that mixed up. It's probably going to be billion, but I need to go back and re-listen to that interview.
Yeah,
but it
no
went from
worries.
a factor from 50 to 80 is what it went to.
Yeah. I suspect that multi-factor market and that security market is probably in the billions now, only because of what we're seeing. I think the cybersecurity spend is probably going to start addressing $1 trillion. And again, we can throw out all sorts of numbers to the audience and everything, but it's fascinating. One, it's concerning, very concerning on the threats that we face now. It's fascinating on how both sides are working to address the threats and how big AI and ML are really moving in to help address that. So one of the things about being analysts, advisors, and research firms is we all get to be futurists, and we really don't have to be accountable for, how we project the future. So let me change topics a little bit, and with our own business and with both of you guys being here 20 plus years, we've seen the market go from, sort of big data center deals to staff augmentation outsourcing, to the rise of the offshore providers, to the rise of remote infrastructure management, to full-on managed services. Now we're in this phase where everything's as a service. Bret, give me your perspective first. What's the future of our business, and what would you predict over the next couple of years as either growth or really what are the big trends that you see the service providers moving into?
Well, Steve, I think I'm going to take a little bit longer term perspective on this. I usually don't operate in the longer term. I usually operate in the very short term. So I wanted to have a little fun with this dialogue here. So I personally believe that the service provider community is just barely scratching the surface when it comes to technologies associated with AI and IoT, smart manufacturing, et cetera. The digital world is fast blending with the real world. And the service provider community really sits at the precipice for enabling that synthesis. You think about how technology has advanced in cars, for example, with safety measures, electric cars, self-driving cars, auxiliary or tangential services like Uber. You think I'm going to switch gears and think about drone technology and how that will advance, product delivery services both on a B2C and a B2B scale. Drones running on AI, for example, could reshape much of the transportation industry or even the healthcare market. You think about how a drone could deliver essential medical supplies to a hospital without getting stuck in traffic. You think about train technology, and how that's evolving, how people and product and supplies can move much faster. We can go from one end of the country to the other in 5 hours, and hopefully that'll be in place with, where it can be done safely and with, fewer carbon emissions. You think about AIs, as Stanton mentioned earlier in the podcast, where they're literally everywhere now. In your cars, your homes. And AIs like IBM's Watson or Google's DeepMind. Just as a few examples. They could be so advanced that in the future our cultures are literally run by them in a logistical and a computer sense. What if in the future we have our own unique AI and customize it to how it looks and sounds? And you think about things like space travel is another example. Mars is the current goal with the ability to set up another colony on another planet. All that requires interconnectivity solutions similar to how we are attempting to set up smart cities today. And prosthetics. Stanton was on Fox Business a year ago. We're talking about this, where that could be big, and how it is being made compatible with the human mind and body, and using computer tech to sync with the brain to give accurate commands is really still the outstanding wild card there. And then finally, you think about things like education and how it can be made more interactive with VR. Students can actually see the things. I have a 17-year-old, and students can actually see the things happening and interact with the subject matter, as opposed to kind of like reading things in a book. That very same VR technology can help us with new ways and visualizing our own workflow and sharing ideas with each other and collaborating. But, with all this, the point being is that the most successful providers, regardless of the delivery model of B2C or B2B, regardless of the time frame, whether it's 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 15 years from now, the most successful providers are the ones who can really continually demonstrate how to marry future use cases and intersect that with technology in order to kind of provide differentiation for their clients. So regardless of the time frame, it's always going to continue to boil down to how do you help customers build differentiation? How do you build those hooks into the products and services that you deliver? So that's kind of how I see this whole thing kind of unfolding here in the future.
That is such an optimistic outlook, Bret. Just really interesting. And I think you're right. There's so many that core technologies that are supported today that we're just at the cusp. So Stan, let me throw it over to you. What's sort of your vision of the future?
Yeah, Steve. Thanks for this question. These are always fun. So I think the big change is going to be really kind of focused on the movement towards this more product-oriented operating model, and then combining that with a new way to work. So we've talked a lot about the gig economy and hybrid workforce. I mean, the way people work today is very different than it was 10 years ago, and I think it's going to be very different 10 years from now. And so I think providers need to be thinking about, how are they going to integrate the best people that they can find, and not only those people, but the knowledge that those people have, the technology, the platforms, the accelerators that they have. How do they integrate that into the buyer's team? And likely they'll be working in pods, right? So you have to almost think about this more of like a merging between the buy and sell side rather than throwing the thing over the fence. It's going to be more of a merging into these pods that are working on products that are focused on things like velocity and quality and the impact of the product, rather than the number of lines of codes created. I mean, Steve, you literally wrote the book on this, so you know this space really well. But I mean, that is a massive change on both sides, on the way that enterprises consume IT services and the way that service providers deliver those services. That's a humongous change. We see it happening. In some cases, a lot of this M&A activity we talked about, that's really where a lot of this is happening. These smaller firms that are thinking this way and operating this way, that's why a lot of these big firms are buying them, is to try to change not the technology, but the culture of how they operate. So I think obviously this is going to have a big implication on the application side of as enterprises buy this kind of technology. But I think the cultural impact of this is going to be huge. So providers that I think are really focused on building diversity into their teams is going to be really, really important. We see this today in our OCM and other practices, the importance of diversity, not only helping our clients, but also providers, think about how to build diversity into their teams. You're going to get better results with a more diverse team. So I think as enterprises, continue to head down that path. Providers need to be thinking about how do they build that diversity in their team in order to better fit into these new product aligned pods that enterprises are creating to go build their products to delight customers. That's a big change, and that's probably kind of a softer change, but I think it's a huge one. And those providers that understand that and can drive that kind of organizational and cultural change into their organization and then help their clients do it, I think are going to do really well over the next decade.
I think you're right, Stanton. Both of you. I can't believe we're almost at the top of the hour on this. This has been absolutely brilliant. So many great insights from both of you. So thank you so much. So let me just say, in wrapping, on behalf of the team, really thanks for lending us your ears. Thanks for participating in the podcast and really listening to our perspective. Be on the lookout for the next episode coming to a podcast near you. We do have 3 new episodes of our executive leadership series teed up. Those promise to be equally exciting. Again, we'd love your feedback, so please rate us, review the podcast. And again, Stanton and Bret, thank you so much for joining us, and have a great day.